Okay, so back again today. Gonna talk some more about my experience and what maybe I can share that might help you find some commonness in your experience with my experience. First off, I never wanted to be a firefighter. I became a firefighter by accident. I didn't dream of being a firefighter when I was a little kid. It turned out I needed a job. I had gotten fired from a job. I was 19 years old. And I wound up at the suggestion of my father talking to the chief of a local small fire department, and I got hired. So at 19 years old, I was a firefighter with no clue about being a firefighter. So that led to working 6 years for a small combination department, paid and volunteer fire department. And after 6 years with that department, then I tested for and became a member of the Colorado Springs Fire Department, and then I worked for the Colorado Springs Fire Department for the next 25 years, so a total of 31 years as a firefighter. So at 19 years old, becoming a firefighter and not really knowing what I was doing or really what the career was about, I just entered into the job. The job at that point in time, 1979, paramedics were just a thing that was coming on the scene. They hadn't been around very long. Paramedics had originated out of the Vietnam War, and so the notion of being an emergency medical technician, becoming a firefighter, and then becoming a paramedic was still a fairly new service. At that point, the fire department wasn't dominated by medical calls. That became our bread and butter, obviously, today. And by the end of my career as a firefighter and a paramedic, over 80% of our job related to paramedicine. So I would engage in drinking as a young man, like any other young man would. I got a day off job. Everybody who has an off-duty job. I had an off-duty job as a bouncer at a local nightclub. Then I became a bartender at that nightclub. And I was young and footloose and fancy-free. And with the bartending and working in that environment, I engaged in drinking wholeheartedly. I drank, just like everybody else did at that time. But I already had a tolerance above and beyond a normal person, and the people that I hung out with, I could always drink more alcohol than they could. So as my career progressed, I married. My wife at that time, she also worked in the bar business. All of our friends worked in the bar business, and we drank and partied a lot. It wasn't until later on in my years, in my mid-20s and late 20s, that alcohol started to become a problem in combination with other drug use. It was the 80s. Let's face it, cocaine was around. I used cocaine. It wasn't necessarily that of a big deal in those days. Pretty much everybody drank and used cocaine. Cocaine allowed me to drink more and longer, and that became a big part of my routine. So I still managed to confine my drinking to fairly normal periods, weekends with friends and partying and birthdays and holidays, whatever it was. But even at that point, I began to drink into blackouts. And so the blackouts became pretty much a normal function. If I was drinking, I drank to the point of stupidity, and I drank to the point of blacking out. And so we've all done it, or not everybody's done it, but if you're like me and you're an alcoholic, or you think you're an alcoholic, you'll find out that you'll get periods like that where you got to call the next day. You got to call friends and find out, hey, what did I do last night? You wake up in places you don't remember going to. You wake up with women you don't know and in circumstances you don't understand. And that became part of what I was doing. So I was drinking at that level, unconsciously and for fun, really, at that point. As the career waged on and I became a medic and the business of the fire service became emergency medicine, we started dealing daily with more and more horrible stuff. We ran on more tragic calls. I worked at the busiest fire company in my city, and it turned out I was also one of the 10 busiest fire engines in the nation. Average call volume of around 18, 20 calls a day. My very first shift at that fire station, we ran 22 calls on my first shift in 1984. So it was always a hopping station. And you spend that many years working in an environment like that. We had major thoroughfares in that part of town, so we had a lot of grinders, a lot of really bad grinders, a lot of people killed in car wrecks. We had auto pedestrian wrecks in that neighborhood, and we had a ton of violence in that neighborhood as well. We had a lot of shooting, we had a lot of drug use, we had a lot of gang activity, and so it becomes this endless parade for me of misery. Just days and days, shifts and shifts went by where we didn't make a difference. We ran on dirt balls. We ran on the low bottom end of society. These people that chronically called 911 as their emergency health. They didn't go to emergency room. They didn't see doctors. They called us. And so we saw them when they stabbed each other and shot each other. We saw them when they beat their wives, when they beat their children, when they beat each other. And that sort of trauma and witnessing that kind of activity day in and day out starts wearing on you. And for me, I started to have nightmares. I started to have dreams. And I had one dream in particular. It was a really bad grinder that we went on. 5 family members were killed in this wreck. Drunk driver had hit them head on and killed everybody. They didn't all die at the scene. Some of them lingered. We had to extricate some. They were children, and they died later on in the process. Mom and Dad were killed instantly in the front seats. And I started having nightmares where I would run that call in my dreams, and when I'd get to the scene, it'd be my family in the car. It'd be my friends in the car. And I was powerless to help these friends and family that were trapped in this car wreck. And they died on me every time. And they died on me every night. And they died repeatedly for weeks and months. And so I started having insomnia. And I couldn't sleep. And I couldn't get any restful sleep when I did. So having a few drinks became a method of getting to sleep. And I could drink myself into unconsciousness, and I could sleep and be free of the nightmares and be free of the dreams. And so that became a crutch. Then I used the drinking to compensate for bad experiences. You know, if I had a bad day, man, I needed some drinks when I got off duty. If I had a great day and I had a great save, a cardiac arrest or a trauma call or something along those lines where we did a great job and we really helped somebody out, then of course you had to celebrate those. You know, you deliver a baby, you know, you celebrate delivering a baby. And so pretty much I drank constantly. If I wasn't on duty, I was drinking. And I started drinking earlier and earlier. You know, I would be drinking by noon. The old, you know, it's noon somewhere became the phrase. You know, it's time to drink. And so I progressed from drinking beer and mixing that with hard liquor to finally no beer at all. It was just pretty much straight up hard liquor in the end. And I started to suffer consequences from the drinking. In the old days, in the early part of my career, you could go to the fire station fairly well hungover and there was no consequences to it. You know, you could just get in a lounge chair, you could sleep it off. Hell, you could go hit your bunk if it was a Sunday or a Monday or something like that after you got the station clean and did your daily checks. You could go get a nap and you could rest. But then the department started to change, and those things weren't acceptable. You know, it wasn't a good idea to show up hungover. Now, if you work with the right crew, you partied with the right crew, you were all hungover together the next day. When you rolled in on Saturday morning, you were all hungover from Friday night. When you rolled in Sunday, you were hungover from Saturday night. So everybody was hungover. It was low-key, we got the job done, and nobody really got hurt or suffered by our actions or by my actions. I'm not going to drag anybody in here with me on this thing. So the drinking didn't have a lot of consequences back then. We could work. My very first shift, I walked into a fire station as a new recruit, and I was cleaning the fire station, and in the cleaning cabinet I found a bottle of vodka. And I took my bottle of vodka that I'd found to my captain, senior captain. Guy had like 25, 30 years on the job when I started working for him. And I took this bottle of vodka and I showed it to him. You know, I was like, oh my God, I found a bottle of vodka. What do I do? And this old captain looked at me and all he said was, put it back. And I came to find out later that the senior plugman I was working with, the old boy there, he had to have a couple of nips off the bottle throughout the day just to get through his shift. To keep the shakes off and to be functional, he had to drink at the station. and everybody knew it, and it was acceptable, and he was a hell of a firefighter. He did a great job as a firefighter. So it was a different culture then. So as the department changed and people started getting DUIs, people started getting, I would get pulled over by police early on in the early 80s and mid 80s, and I knew the cop. And we had the old brotherhood of the badge there, If I wasn't in a wreck, if I was just driving under the influence, I had police officers give me rides home. I had police officers follow me home to make sure that I got home. And so I didn't suffer any consequences. I didn't get DUIs. These guys took care of me. We took care of each other. But those things changed. And so I never got a DUI. Lord knows how I didn't get a DUI, but I never suffered a DUI. But other guys did. And as it started to become a problem for the fire department, and drinking became more of a problem, and use became more of a problem for the department, then departments started creating consequences for that. They started developing policies that addressed that. They had policies that implemented a last chance contract. And that's what happened the first time that I got sober, and the first time that I got into treatment was following an off-duty blackout suicide attempt. It was public. You can't do that. I was off duty. My ex was a firefighter. She called 911. That brought the ambulance crew. I knew everybody on the ambulance crew. That bought actually my own engine company. I was on vacation, and so my crew ran on me that night that I did that. So now I'm drunk and suicidal in front of all the firefighters. I get transported to the hospital by medics that I know in the ambulance. I get transported to the hospital that my physician advisor as a paramedic and supervises me, works out of that hospital. She's on duty the night that I come in. I know all the nurses. I know all the staff. So this is a public deal. And like we say in the business, telephone, telegraph, telefireman. It was known job-wide what I had done. And so the department offered me a last chance contract. And that meant that I had to stay sober for 365 days. I had to go into treatment. I had to be subject to random UAs all the time. I had to do counseling. Just tons and tons of stuff. But I was all right with that. I really did want to get sober, and I really wanted help. And so I made it through that last chance contract, and that wound up leading to 7 years of sobriety, and it really worked well for me until I had an excuse to drink again, and that was a divorce came down, and I drank again. And after I drank that time, I wound up 7 years later in the public eye again. My ex-wife called the fire department on me for this drunken episode, and only by the grace of God and a wonderful fire chief, I was given a second last chance contract. And that led to, ultimately, that led to me being put in a position to retire. I showed up at work, a little bit of liquor on my breath. I got caught by one of our teetotalers, a guy that never drank, close proximity to the guy. We were moving furniture. He smelled liquor on me, and that was it. And because I had 25 years on the job, because I was over 50 years old, my department allowed me to retire. And then that led to all the consequences of now being a retired firefighter with no idea what I was going to do. A lot of retirees commit suicide. We identify, our entire life is identified with being a firefighter. And when that's taken away, you don't know what to do with yourself. You're on the other side of the yellow tape, and that's where you are. And this notion that we have in the fire service of, the brotherhood, the sisterhood, that, we're second family, we take care of each other. Well, guess what? When you retire, that goes out the window. There are some friends that I still maintain from the department. But when you're done and you go in that fashion, there isn't anybody writing, There's nobody calling. There's nobody stopping by and checking on you and seeing how you're doing. You're just gone, and that's it. There is no second family. So at least that was my experience. Maybe it's just because I was an asshole. I don't know. But that could happen. So the point of these videos is I'm just trying to share my experience on how I got caught, don't get caught, and how I got sober, how I maintained my sobriety, and also how I survived suicide, and what to do with suicidal thoughts, suicide ideation, Firefighters are killing themselves in record numbers these days. When we do something, we do really good at it. We drink really hard, we party really hard, and when we become a danger to ourselves and suicidal, we generally are pretty good at suicide as well, it's sad to say.